Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road.
Supernatural podcast, but it's just two people who say Dean is bi every week. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast.
Today, we have a very special bonus episode. We are talking about Stanford Era Headcanons, and today I have with me KJ from Supernatural Opinions. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
So happy to have you. KJ and I recorded an episode that is going to come out in a couple of weeks as part of season 2, but then we've actually recorded this one afterwards, but it's going to come out before because we got talking on Twitter about the Stanford era, and one thing led to another, and we got very excited about some very specific headcanons, and we thought we needed a whole bonus episode to talk about them.
Literally, I have not experienced so much joy in the Supernatural fandom in so long. This brought the joy back.
Hey, that's what we're all about. We haven't really talked a whole lot about how we're going to do this, but I think we're going to just talk about the timeline we do know, like what we do know about the Stanford years, and then all of the headcanons that we have, or headcanons that have been shared with us on social media in the last couple of weeks. Because, yeah, that's what we're doing.
People on social media have had even better ones than the ones that I originally had. So I'm really glad that we asked for help.
Yeah, me too. Glad we pulled in some other experts to give us ideas. So maybe we'll start with what we know and what we can say about the Stanford era. So the first big debate in the Stanford era is how long is it? Because the show doesn't seem to know.
It's either 2 years or 4 years or some amount of time between 2 and 4 years.
But yet Sam, by the end of it, Sam is 22 and Dean is 26.
Yes, that is the only thing we actually know for sure.
Yeah.
And then it's 2005.
Right. Which I think I tend to lean towards it being 4 years because Sam's applying to law school. So he clearly has his bachelor's degree. Yeah. Unless he did it in 2 years.
Year.
Exactly.
He's definitely in his 4th year. I agree. It's 4. Also, that would make him 18, 19-ish when he started, which is the appropriate age that you would start going to university.
Exactly. And it seems like he would have been, especially to get scholarships and stuff, you generally often have to do that right out of high school, or a lot of them you aren't eligible for by the time you're 20. So it doesn't really make sense that he would have done it later. And also I don't see him sticking around for 2 years after high school with how he felt about hunting.
Yeah, why would he wait 2 years and then leave?
So obviously, backing up, this is not going to be a spoiler-free episode. We are going to talk about everything we know. It's also going to be largely headcanoning. So, it's not really going to spoil anything major, but we are putting that out there. We are not held liable if you get a later season spoiled because it's something we mentioned in this episode.
Yeah, I like to base my headcanons in show.
Yes.
I like there to be some basis in the canon.
Yes. We've been talking in one of my classes this year. We were talking about transactional theory, about literature, and basically, anyway, I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but one of the tenets of it is defensible interpretation, and the idea that you can come to a text or a piece of media and bring in your own experiences and you take out your own interpretation, but there is such a thing as, better and worse interpretations, and, and the key thing being is it defensible from the text? And I think that's how I generally think about headcanons as well, is they have more weight if they have some basis in canon.
Yes, I agree with everything that you just said.
we're gonna back up. We're gonna give our reasons for why these headcanons we think are true. Yeah. Which is also why I think we even done that with saying how we think it's 4 years, because I think that just makes sense. We know in the season 15 flashback episode that Sam at about 15, 16 is looking at colleges.
Yeah, he's thinking about it.
So I think he goes at 18.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Maybe I feel like in the John Winchester journal, which you can choose to take as canon or not, it's an optional.
I love optional canon.
It conflicts directly with the show a lot. So if you like are like what's in the show is canon, then like, you know, you might not feel that the John Winchester journal is, but you know, it is put out by a publisher. It's technically part of the universe. But in that Sam is like held back a grade at some point because of all the moving around that John inflicts on him as a child. So he's like 19, which I think 19 more supports the 2-year theory, but I think that even still.
even still, yeah, I feel like I could go either way on that one. Like it
doesn't make sense for Sam to be applying to law school if it's only 2 years.
No.
To have done a pre-law like bachelor's degree in less than 4 years is a lot. I know someone who fast-tracked through high school and then fast-tracked through university in 3 years to then go into law school. But like that's not, most people can't do that, especially someone who has no money and like Sam would have had to work during school like to afford to live.
Yeah, and if you take that he had gotten held back, you know, or even if he's not ever been held back in school, like he graduated obviously, but he didn't get a fantastic high school education just because they moved around so much. Like I'm sure there are gaps in his. I'm sure that like it makes sense. To full
ride to Stanford is wild. I always say every time it's brought up in the show that like there's no way he could have actually gotten into
How did you get a full ride? How did you get?
But we're pretending he did somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Pretend that somehow he's the one in a million that actually got lucky enough to
somehow get into Stanford on this broken education and no home address. And
my headcanon about that is that it was Bobby's address, that Bobby had
I hope so.
I think it was a fic, maybe it was just a headcanon that someone had. And so we will try and cite our sources once we get something from someone else. But this one I don't remember. But someone had actually identified that as a potentially part of the rift between John and Bobby, not the fight that they have that gets referenced in season 1, but like that previously that they already had some animosity because Sam
there's a lot of
his paperwork to Bobby.
With how long Bobby and John were in contact with each other too, like a lot of inconsistency.
Yeah, makes very little sense. But I love the idea that Sam was giving Bobby's address, that Bobby was like hiding the hiding the
I would love that for Bobby.
Yeah, because it just like backs up to the idea that like Bobby did believe in giving the boys agency.
Their dad, even though he's not actually their dad, he's their dad.
And it would also explain why, like after all the years, when Sam and Dean see Bobby again, Sam's like protectiveness, and I'm thinking of like the scene where he's physically protecting Bobby from Meg, and like makes a lot more sense if Bobby's one of the reasons he was able to go to Stanford. So
yes, I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, what we know is that it was 2 to 4 years. We're choosing to say probably 4-ish. And
yeah, so like probably like 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
To 2000, like late 2005.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's 4 years and with that, we also like the show strongly implies, kind of states that Sam and Dean didn't have any contact in that time, or at least that it had been, I think they say 2 years, which is again one of the conflicting things.
That is the first thing that's on my list.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about that then?
Yeah. So I think that like they didn't see each other. I think that like obviously like there was a time where like they were really mad at each other. Like when Sam first left, they didn't talk at first, and then I think, you know, after a couple of weeks they started talking again, like on the phone, like often, like every couple of days.
I agree, because I don't think that just because John
so much of Dean's self-worth is in Sam like being okay, that I don't think that Dean would have gone.
I don't think he could have handled
it. Yeah, I don't think he could have like just not talked to Sam.
No, like just checking. Like I don't think he could have not done it. I think he would have like maybe refused to talk about the fight. That he maybe would have just like acted like it didn't happen, and he would have definitely been hiding any communication he had with Sam from John.
And I think, I definitely think he was hiding it from John. And I think like the first like few months that they were talking again, Sam did all the talking and he would tell Dean about everything he was doing. And then there was a flip where Sam realized that Dean like is actively hurt by hearing about Sam's good life at college that he doesn't get to
Oh.
have. So then Dean starts doing all the talking about hunting for like the next like however long. And then I think about 2 years in, like Dean just like asks Sam to come home and Sam won't come home. And I think that's when they stop talking.
Oh, okay. That makes it way more personal, which actually matches the show so much better because the feel like Dean has a sense of like real strong betrayal when he comes back to, and he has this like real like it doesn't seem to just be about John saying don't come back. It seems to also be about something that happened between the two of them, but we don't ever really get to hear about. Yeah, I like the idea that it was two different fights. That's like that was the real nail in the coffin, was that it wasn't.
Yeah,
Sam.
It was like over time, like first Sam was really excited about college, then he realized that like Dean hates that he's at college, so then he just like listens to Dean. Maybe he even does some like research for Dean, and then Dean's like, well, you could just like come and help us on this job or that job, and like,
right, you've had enough education, right? Like you've gotten 2 years, like it's,
and like the more he asks, the less Sam wants to talk to him. Then like one day Sam's like, this is enough, I can't do it,
like I'm not coming back.
Maybe around the time he meets Jess, because that kind of like lines up.
Well, and if he's suddenly realizing like, oh, I could really do this, like I could really get through school, and maybe that's when he decides to go to law. Maybe that's when he decides. Maybe that's when he's going like, okay, I really know what I want now. I've met this girl. Like I am not absolutely not coming back to hunting. And maybe also, I don't know, maybe he also like thought talking to Dean about college and about his life would eventually make Dean also want that. And like maybe he thought, oh, maybe eventually like if Dean sees that like it's possible, he'll come and also maybe not go to school, but maybe he'll come and also, you know, maybe he like casually has been throwing ideas of like, oh, what if you were a mechanic, what if you know, there's a really great trade school like locally, you know, I don't know, like I keep seeing these apartments open up nearby, like keeps dropping hints like to be like, hey, you could like come, I really feel around.
It was like, like 2 years of the two of them trying to convince each other that like, hey, you could have this life that I have. And then like they just couldn't take it anymore, and they had a big fight about it, and then just like couldn't bear to like acknowledge the fight.
and then that's when they stop speaking. So I think my headcanon about that has always been that Dean has been pretty regularly like driving to California, regardless of whether or not there's a case, to check on Sam, because like he knows, I mean, even in the pilot he knows where Sam lives, and obviously he can figure that out.
Sam's Sam's so tall that I feel like it'd be hard to recognize him, and I don't know, in my head where Jess is a fully formed character, I feel like Jess is one of the most liked people on campus. She just seems very fun and delightful, and like she gets along with people. Popular, I feel like everybody knows who Jess Moore is.
I feel like it wouldn't have been, actually I like that, because I like the idea that like Dean finds out about where Sam is and like where to find Sam, because he's you know, poking around campus, he's asking questions, he's doing his little investigating, and he keeps hearing about Jess, and then he eventually connects the dots of like, oh, Jess and Sam, and like Jess is, and then that's how what gets him to Sam is that he keeps he describes Sam, and people are like, oh, I think I might know who that is. I think he's dating that like girl. Yeah,
that girl that everybody knows.
That girl, I think he's dating Jess Moore. Oh, I like that.
Sam, isn't that Jess's boy?
Yeah, exactly. So Dean goes into sneaking into Jess and Sam's apartment already knowing about Jess. He doesn't seem all that surprised when he meets Jess, honestly. Which does lead to an alternate headcanon theory. This one's a little bit more off canon. Okay. But I have this whole headcanon and fic that I would love to read and or write about Jess and Dean actually having met pre season 1, and also having met before Sam and Jess actually met, because you know, like Sam and Jess meet a couple of years into his time at Stanford, and I love the idea that like Dean and Jess have met because of some other case that he was working, that Sam is also connected to the hunting world, because like when we look at like later seasons, there's no coincidences Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
There's no coincidences in the supernatural universe. Nobody's like just a normal person. Everyone's got some like something in their past, something that's tied them into this story.
Yeah.
And like, I like the idea that with Jess, that maybe she's had some experience with the supernatural, and it's obviously turned out all right. She went to college. She doesn't seem like she's actually just like traumatized and hiding it. She's not like Sam. She seems like she's pretty well adjusted. But I love the idea that like her, you know, on some hunt, her and Dean met and interacted, and that she found out about the supernatural universe. And that's one of the things that makes her really sympathetic to Sam. Like that's one of the reasons that like some of the weird stuff about Sam doesn't throw her.
There's so many weird red flag things about Sam.
So many. Like they live together. There's no way she doesn't see some of those red flags.
Like Sam in the pilot has like weapons like that he just like is like stuffing in a bag like 3 seconds before she walks in. If she walked in like 2 seconds quicker, she would have seen that like knife thing that Sam was stuffing in his duffel bag. He like doesn't talk about his family. Like she knows who Dean is, but like even when like Sam's talking to like their other friend about like how well he did on the LSAT, like he Jess doesn't really like know anything about his family aside from the fact that like Sam doesn't want to talk about them. And like if I was living with someone as like a romantic partner,
I'd want to at least know.
They were that close, like lived about their like family after like Sam and Jess have been dating for 1.5 years when the pilot happened.
And even if you don't like you don't, I don't know, it makes sense that Sam wouldn't have told her about hunting. That kind of makes sense. But the fact that he wouldn't have like come up with some
story of
some other story of like, oh, I'm estranged with my family because, you know, like my mom died, it's just like my dad's really obsessed with his work, and like there's a lot of like stories that would have then thrown off some suspicion. So I like the idea that like the reason that Jess doesn't clue into all these red flags is because she actually like has her own story
going.
Yeah, exactly. And she's a little bit more willing to let those
we don't
go.
know anything about her family either, so we can really think whatever we want.
Exactly. And we do know that Sam and Jess met because of a demon. So we do know that like there's been some manipulation in them meeting. So you know, why wouldn't you choose someone who like has some connections to the supernatural universe in some way? And I like that because then when you get it also makes more sense. Like when you get Jess and Dean meeting, and Dean says, you know, Dad's on a hunting trip. He hasn't been home in a few days. And Jess is putting together all the pieces.
Jess has not enough questions from the pilot, like at all.
No, not enough. And
to not know anything about what's going on.
Exactly. So I like the idea that she's met Dean, because if she's met Dean and maybe he's also like, maybe it was unavoidable that she found out stuff. Like we know Dean doesn't go around telling people about his life or about the supernatural world. It's not his thing. But if she found out like kind of inevitably, and if it was like during the time when him and Sam are like kind of fighting whenever they're talking on the phone, when like they're not doing well, and he's figuring out that Sam's not coming back. And you know, maybe they go to a bar after the hunt, maybe, you know, or maybe whatever, and they're talking. And I'm not saying flirting because gross. And also I don't see it. But like maybe he tells her stuff like that he doesn't like mean to. And when he shows up, Jess puts all these pieces together and goes, I actually know. And then suddenly she knows way more about Sam than Sam has ever told her, because
that would make so much more sense. Like literally she's like, okay, you're just going with your brother for the weekend to go visit this family that you never talked to or about.
Like, to go find your dad who you've probably never mentioned, you like have refused to talk about.
And then her only thing is like while he's like walking away from her, she's like, well, at least tell me where you're going, and then he's gone. Like that's
she doesn't even, presumably he doesn't even answer that question. Like it makes so much more sense if she knows. It makes so much more sense if she knows the context. Like she's, and if the reason that she's willing to let him go is because she's like, oh, this is actually a big deal, and like we can't have this actual like conversation right now, but I do know what you're doing.
I mean, like Sam is like 6'4" and like could just walk through any human being, but like if I'm Jess and I don't actually know anything, I am chasing him all the way to the car and I'm hanging off of him like a monkey.
You're being like, absolutely not. You don't just get
Until
to
I
like
get some
walk
answers.
away. Exactly. You're like, you don't get to just like leave
In the
with
middle
no
of
answers
the night.
in the middle of
It's
the
like
night with your brother who broke in.
yeah. Why didn't your
didn't
mother
knock.
use the friggin' door?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's there's so many red flags that go up, and I like the idea that Jess
Jess is
knew,
the most trusting human being in the world, or she knows something.
or she knows something. But if she knows something, she's so much more interesting. And also, her story becomes way more tragic then, because then she knew stuff before. You know, like
I always find her ending like really sad, especially like once we find out like 5 seasons in that like Brady was like her friend.
Yeah. She just gets screwed over by everyone. Poor Jess.
And like she's like this like nice person who like makes cookies in like the middle of the night.
She just seems like I mean she is sort of the girl next door trope for Sam.
Totally.
She is sort of like the
Sam gets home and like he literally just finds like a plate of cookies and like a post-it note. And like
it's just very sweet.
So
yeah, let's just like do Sam Jess headcanons, because I know you have a bunch. I know you have a bunch. So
I want to start with how Sam and Jess met.
Yes.
Because I first said art history, because I'm like in a season 1 episode. Sam mentions he took an art history course.
Providence, yeah. You know, I seem to like really enjoy it. Okay, I like this.
Which I was like, okay, I like that. But then I thought, no. Sam took an ASL course in
that's
college.
That's better. That's
way better.
It's better for like long-term Sam development. Do we ever get an explanation in the later seasons about why Sam knows ASL when he meets Eileen?
He says that he took some in college, like a little bit in college. And I'm like, that's enough for me to say he took a class. Plus, I wanted Jess and Eileen to have something in common in my headcanon.
Also, I like that, because then that's the fact, because you know, like language is one of those things that if you don't keep it up, you don't necessarily remember it. And like Sam remembering what he remembers makes more sense if maybe he learned it with Jess, because then that's maybe a thing he's used to keep her memory alive.
And we don't know anything about what Jess is taking at Stanford. Like Jess is just like, we don't even know if Jess is technically a student at Stanford. Like we literally know nothing about Jess.
We literally know nothing about Jess. Yeah.
So I was like, I'm like, I can make her be whatever I want, and I can make her have taken whatever courses I want. So like, we know this. And like, I was like, what if Sam, like, I feel like Sam would be someone who would have a really hard time saying like, I love you. So like, what if like they used to just like say it in ASL?
Oh, that's really cute. Yeah, I could definitely see that.
And I was like,
I like that.
I was like, I can just see Sam like seeing her and then being like,
I feel like
ASL just made me really like
I like that a lot too. And it goes along too with like Sam, like when we meet Sam in the pilot and we see him in season 1, we see him contrasted to Dean a lot in terms of like he's more socially skilled because he's had like experience in the real world. But like I love thinking about the idea of like Sam at 18 when he hadn't had any of those experiences, just being like entirely
awkward,
lost,
closed off person. Like he's like never really had anyone except for Dean.
No, he doesn't have any idea how to make friends or how to just like have normal conversations that aren't about like,
even when we see him like in flashback episodes like making friends with other kids his age, like how long do those friendships last, because he's gonna move again?
Yeah, like a couple months at most.
I spent a lot of time this last week watching just the apartment scenes from the pilot to see like what's in their apartment.
Ooh, okay.
So I noticed that they have a lot of houseplants in their apartment. And I was like, I feel like everyone thinks that Jess loves houseplants, but like Sam would actually be the one who like takes care of these plants. He waters them every day and he like talks to them, and he keeps bringing more home because he likes growing something rather than like killing something.
Right. And the idea of like being stable enough in a home to like have houseplants. Like you don't buy a houseplant unless you're sticking around. Yeah.
Their apartment is also very cluttered. And we know from later seasons that Sam is not an interior decorator type at all.
No, he literally doesn't seem to care a whole lot.
When he has the opportunity to stay somewhere for an extended amount of time, he is like not. He's like, what's the most basic furniture I can have? And I'm never going to put anything on the walls. But their apartment has a lot of stuff in it. Like they have like a beaded curtain and like stuff on the walls and knickknacks. And I could just see like Jess like this like summer before they moved in, like dragging them like to all of the yard sales Like I noticed in particular they had like a really comfy looking like leather chair that looks like exactly something you would buy at like a yard sale.
Yeah. And you're broke college students like trying to furnish an
Yeah.
apartment, and you're like living with a partner for the first
All
time.
of
so you're
my
very excited
furniture
about
is
it.
secondhand. And
Yeah, same.
I feel like that was most of my Sam and Jess like centric ones.
Yeah. Okay.
If there's more in there, I'm sure we'll get back.
I'm sure we're just jumping around with all of
Yeah.
this. We're just having a grand old time. So now, okay, so we saw, I don't remember, I saw this set of posts on Twitter. I'll see if I can link them. We'll probably link a few different people that have provided some headcanons in the notes for this episode, of like supernatural characters with like hair dye, like with dyed hair, specifically Sam with different
that's
shades
what
of
really
hair color.
started all of this. Like...
It is. And we saw a picture of Sam with like bright red hair because he had dyed, and I was like, all I could think about was Sam going through a rainbow hair dyeing phase as a freshman.
I want that for Sam so badly. I feel like Sam needs that.
Yeah, I feel like he needed to be able to experiment without having anyone tell him, oh, that's like a waste of money, or that's a waste of time, or like that'll make you more visible, or like
girly,
that's too girly, or like any of the stupid.
Because Dean and John are so disgustingly misogynistic.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Hyper masculine all the time.
Yeah, and hyper just like utilitarian about everything, even in terms of, you have a couple of notes. This kind of leads into, you had a couple of notes about Sam and like clothing.
Yeah, I had one where like like all of Sam's clothes are hand-me-downs for his entire life, or like thrift stores, because like John's not buying them more clothes than they need, and like Dean's 4 years older than him.
Yeah, he's
and,
definitely
like,
just
hand-me-downs are fine. I grew up on hand-me-downs. My cousin's 5 years older than me.
Yeah,
and I wore all of her clothes.
Yeah, hand-me-downs are great, but they probably particularly had
there's something
choice
about never picking your own clothes ever.
Yeah,
it's like, like I wore hand-me-downs, but like if I really wanted something, like no one was gonna like tell me, no, you can never have anything that's yours ever. Like there's something about like expressing yourself with hair dye or with clothes for like the first time, and like not worrying about like masculinity or like what other people think. Like,
yeah, and I feel like that's such a normal thing to do when you're first in college too, and you're first away from home, or whenever you're first away from home. And for Sam, it's just amplified because he was in such a restricted sort of scenario before then. So I like the idea of Sam just like going through a phase where every like month he dyes his hair a different color.
Sam's hair is also very important to him, just in general.
Yeah.
Has a lot of significance to him. I feel like part of that is like, I feel like Dean ruined Sam's hair at one point when they were kids.
And so Sam's like, they will never cut this hair. Oh.
I forget when we learned that. I feel like I want to say Hell House. I feel like Dean says he put Nair in Sam's shampoo once, and like,
yeah, it's Hell House. Yeah.
That would do such horrible damage to your hair.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like, most of it would fall out, and then like whatever didn't fall out would be damaged.
Yeah.
And like Sam obviously cares about his appearance, and
he was probably trying really hard to like also like fit in, and
he's always felt like a freak, and like always felt like he doesn't fit in. So then to like be like a teenager and like, or like a kid, and have that happen to him, and then like like that, I feel like that would just like make him very strongly identify with like his hair.
So he just like tries things once he can. He just like goes real hard on like the trying things phase.
And he keeps his hair like long, even when it's like impractical, when he's like back into hunting. For the record, purple hair Sam is still my favorite. Blonde highlight Sam is high up on my list, but I feel like it's like too similar to like what he just naturally has.
Yeah, the purple is like the most like bold choice, and it's great. Yes. We will if I can find the link, I will put it in the show notes, because it was a great edit that someone did.
Yeah, whoever tweeted that, excellent work. Whoever like did the edit, also
yes, you're responsible for you're mostly responsible for this whole episode, so thank you.
Kind of with the clothes, I had one where like Sam went through like a phase where he like had to like discover like contemporary music, like music that existed after 1980.
Yeah, because he really wouldn't know any of it.
Yeah, he's just like, I know I don't really love whatever it is that Dad and Dean have going on, but like there's like 20 years of music that I'm just missing.
And so then he like goes I could see him like going to like the school library and the public library and just taking out like CDs, taking out like cassette tapes and CDs and like playing them and just like playing his little walk, going
morning, or like his friends like show him like, hey, like, how do you not know this song? And like, what do you mean you've never heard of this person or that person? I don't know who was big in 2000 and like the early 2000s. I was a child.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, yeah, like he would have had this like, what do you mean you don't know who this person is? And then like he's like, oh, this guy. I hate Sam's like in canon like artists that Sam actually likes. I think they're the most ridiculous out there choices. Any of the choices, like the three I can think of, he likes Vincent Sente, which is like fine. That's like the one I'm most okay with.
Yeah, Celine Dion.
I hate that Sam's like canon favorite singer of all time is Celine
Dion. Because it comes up more than once. It comes up more than once.
I hate that so much, especially post like that whole like episode about the Titanic where they have I hate that everything.
It's bad. It's bad.
The only reason that I'm actually willing to let it slide is because Sam claiming that his favorite is Elvis, so he doesn't have to say it's Celine Dion, is even worse.
Yeah.
I do not believe for 1 second that Sam Winchester likes Elvis.
Also, no one who has ever met Sam Winchester would ever think he liked Elvis. That's like the least likely music choice.
Like, I get that like music is like Dean's thing, but like
music's everyone's thing. Everyone has a music thing.
Yeah, and like Dean has like all of these classic rock like songs. Also, he got Taylor Swift somehow.
Yeah, which like is 100% in character, but like we could have gotten some good some good artists that Sam could have liked, and in college would have been when he would have found them.
Yeah,
and
like even in like season 4, like Sam like has like the iPod jack, and like we only get one song, and it's Jason Mans because he's a friend of the show.
Yeah,
but like I feel like that is totally like, Sam would totally be into that kind of like genre of music, like that like kind of like indie-ish.
Yeah,
like,
I can definitely see that indie rock. So like there's some familiarity with like some of the tones that he would have grown up with, but it's softer, it's more melancholy, it's more like
Sam's a moody kid.
Yeah, it's a mood. Like he also would have liked. Oh, I also read a really good fic. Oh, I don't remember which artist it was. I read a really good fic recently that had some of Sam's music choices, and they were all like sort of, they were like Fall Out Boy and like things that were just
Sam
like
was totally 100% like had a Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco. He had that entire face.
Like it's just and you know that with the dyed hair and the like.
Oh yes. Yeah,
it's very much like 18-year-old Sam.
As someone who had their Fall Out Boy face in 2020.
Nice.
I support that. I also had my hair dyeing phase in 2020.
Hey, you know what? 2020 was a good year to have all of those phases. It was also a very moody kind of year, so you know.
We were stuck inside. I was coming out. It was a good time.
That's generally when you have those kind of phases. They kind of go all together.
I just wanted it all in.
Yeah. Another one that we found on Tumblr. This is from user TransJess. And they were talking about how they think Sam, like, because they never really use like proper first aid kits,
which is wild.
Which like, because they've been using like, this post says, John's been using whiskey and dental floss this whole time. Sam goes to Stanford, and one day he trips and cuts his knee pretty bad, and Jess helps him home, and he goes to pour neat vodka on the wound, and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? There's sterile alcohol wipes and butterfly strips in the background. And Sam's like, wait a second, maybe we are stupid.
I love that, everything in that. And like just being like, what the hell? Like
just being like,
he's a first aid kit. Like it's under the sink.
You're like, why would your first instinct be to pour alcohol? She's like, we would like.
Also, they're students; they can't afford to be pouring the alcohol.
Also, I mean, even in terms of John, like, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, totally. He wouldn't have had a like $10.
Not know where a drug? Like, does John not know that every town in America has a friggin' drugstore in it?
And the Band-Aids are like $2 for a box.
Yeah, how much does whiskey cost?
A lot more than Band-Aids.
How much does whiskey cost versus like a bottle of like peroxide.
Yeah, exactly.
You're probably not
exactly.
supposed to pour peroxide on wounds anymore.
No,
Like, that's out of date.
I don't think so. But that would have made sense for maybe for that era.
The 80s.
Exactly. Like we're not saying that John Winchester should have like.
That's like my
been, like,
least favorite part of what's changing channels is when they're in the operating suite and Sam asks for like all of the John Winchester style like stuff, and I'm like, buddy, you know that the dental floss and the penknife is the scalpel and the suture kit, right?
Like, you do know
stuff you should want.
Like, you do know this. Yeah.
It's the same thing, just this is the proper equipment. Like, what are
This
you
will be
doing with the
easier.
fifth of whiskey that the like
Yeah.
the sterilize that the iodine sitting there isn't gonna do for you?
Yeah, exactly. I like the idea though that because we have that canon, knowing that they used only whiskey and dental floss, that Sam would have been like
Jess is
18
just
and
like,
been
what the hell are you doing?
Jess is like, how and Sam's like, I don't know, she's like, this is what my dad used to do. Like, just kind of like, he's like, well, that's what my dad did. And then like shuts the hell up, is like, oh no, I can't, I said too much. I'd like to see it
flipped where Jess is the one who's hurt and Sam's like, oh, no problem, like I can take care of that. And he like goes, and she's like, what the hell are you doing?
She's like, stop. She's like, stop, I don't want to drink right now. And he's like, no, I was gonna pour it on the wound to sterilize it. And she's like, I have rubbing alcohol. She's like, I have an antiseptic
yes, we
wipe.
can definitely do this at home, but like the proper equipment is under the counter.
Jess just like having to like be just these just being like all the puzzle pieces Jess is putting to like Jess just being like a little bit of a detective. And she's like, okay,
red flag for Jess if she doesn't actually know it.
Collecting pieces of data from their lives to be like, was his family in the mafia?
I'm now picturing Jess pulling like a Bella Swan where she saves down with Google. She like puts all the pieces together.
She's like, what could he possibly be? What could he possibly be running from? And then just comes up with like jack squat.
I mean, the mafia is like the only conclusion.
The mafia is the only
really rich.
Yeah, and she's like, she just becomes convinced that he's running from the mafia and that he'll tell her eventually. Why don't we move to the other side of this
let's
brother pairing.
Dude, I feel like it's way easier to come up with Sam and Jess ones because like Dean, like we just get like a case mentioned here or there. We don't know anything about Dean's actual life during this time, like at all.
We know nothing, so we get to make it all up, which is fun. The things we do know is that we know there's three things we do know. We know that him and Cassie dated for a couple of weeks in this period, generally speaking. We know that he hooked up with Lisa in this period, generally speaking.
Or like directly right before this period.
Or right before this period. And we know that he was hunting with Lee during this period. These are the three things we know.
Up with, just saying.
That's gonna be the start of our headcanons. Is we're gonna start with Lee and the fact that
I don't know who watched Last Call and didn't be like they were fucking, but
yeah, I don't think you can really watch that. I mean, like, even if you watch that episode with no context, like it doesn't matter. You watch the episode with no context or you watch with all the context, and both of those watchings,
either way, you're getting to the same place.
And like the way they talk about their experiences, the way they talk about John, the way they talk about
it feels like Lee was with them for a while because like he knew he was like with John, like he worked multiple jobs where John was present.
And this is when presumably they're about in they're like 20, 21, give or take, if we're taking it as probably during the Stanford era, which makes sense.
If Sam was 18 when he left, then Dean would have been 22.
So they're so the fact that like I think we know that they hunted together for quite a while, and I think that they also were not explicitly dating, but we're definitely hooking up, and we're definitely like
they were definitely
dating,
like, getting drunk and messy on the job. What we actually like canonically know is that one time they got in trouble for being drunk on a job.
Which
John quote unquote caught them.
Right. The language used in that episode is a very interesting script writing choice. You're like,
the lighting, the script, everything.
The karaoke.
It's such a heavy like Sam and Eileen episode also to like
To contrast, well, and it's in this
Yeah.
whole season with, you know, like at the point where we're getting
And it's
in
like
season
the
15.
divorce arc.
Yeah, we're getting all of these like well, and the fact, you know, like we have had so many parallels throughout the show of like part of like romantic partners of the Winchesters, them either having to like abandon them or losing them to a monster or having to kill them because they become a monster. And like that's exactly what happened.
Lee is all of the above.
Lee is literally all three of those things. And whenever they do that with Sam, it's always with like a female romantic partner. When they do that with Dean, it's like 50% a female and 50% a male.
Still always a romantic partner.
Yeah, exactly. Like with Sam, they don't generally, it's not generally like with Sam that they also do, you know, sometimes it's a buddy and sometimes it's a romantic partner. It's like almost exclusively romantic partners.
And when it is a buddy with Sam, it's so obviously a buddy. Like even just like in season 1, like Zach and Becky.
Oh yeah. It's so
like,
obviously
Becky, it's so obvious that there's zero chemistry between Sam and Becky.
Yeah, because she's got a boyfriend.
They
like,
didn't even try.
They don't even try. They don't even try to shoehorn it in. And well, this is the thing. So like the Dean and Lee being a thing is pretty strongly there. So we like that's happening during this, which is also interesting, kind of leads into like some of my headcanons, which are just basically thinking that like this was Dean's like experience of exploring sexuality, that if he was before Sam left, it was a lot more hidden because it had to be, because not only is he having to hide it from John, but he's also hiding it from Sam because he doesn't know what Sam will think. And Sam
he can't get caught while Sam's living with them, because if John says get the hell out of my life, and then Sam's stuck with John,
then Sam's alone, and he's not going. He was not going to risk.
He's never going to risk that.
Whereas as soon as Sam's not in the picture, like Dean's only risking his own relationship with John, which we know is rocky, and we know John was already abandoning him once all the time. So the fact that John is like disappearing for long periods of time, he had a lot of opportunity to be exploring his own relationships. Like we know that the only significant relationship in his adult life, Cassie, happens during this period.
Yeah, and it's only a couple of weeks, which is not that long.
No, so like I think the like idea that there's a lot more other experimenting
going on.
It's a
very deep connection. We love Cassie.
We love Cassie.
Like, multiple podcast episodes.
Cassie comes up a lot in both of our shows for how short of a period of time she's on the show. I also think that like this is the period when Dean gets his GED, because I don't think he has reason to before then. And I think Sam going off to school means that at some point he decides like, I want to have this for myself.
Yeah, it always seemed weird to me that Dean like didn't finish school, but then like went back and finished, like, and we don't have any prompting for what prompted that at all.
Yeah.
That seems like a big choice as a character.
Well, yeah, it's like a thing that takes, I mean, you and I are both Canadian. So, but like from what I know about the GED in terms of how it works in the States, like it's, you know, there's a decent amount of studying involved. There's like, this is not like this is not just like he had to show up one day. He would have had to like book it. He would have to stay in a town long enough to do it. And he would have had to see a purpose in it. And there doesn't seem to be any practical purpose that is ever really said. So it seems to have been a point of like personal, like it seemed to be for just an entirely personal reason. Like it's just because he wanted it, because he wanted to prove.
Unless there's some motivation with Sam to get it, which we don't know about. Like there's no other reason to.
Yeah. And I wonder if it happened during the Stanford era because maybe he, you know, has more time on his hands. He's not focused on being a caregiver. And
now I'm just imagining Dean and Sam on the phone with each other and they're both doing homework.
Oh, because also maybe that's one of the things is that like Sam encourages him to do it. Sam goes, you know, like Sam's telling all about school or not encourages him to do it, but like Sam is just talking so excitedly about school, and Dean is like, maybe
they're like I don't know, like in common with somebody. Like I've definitely like watched a TV show so that we would have this like TV show to talk about like in common. So I can see Dean being like, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna finish my GED. So Sam and I have something in common.
That is adorable.
Like, smooth our relationship over.
That I can see it. I like that. I like that a lot. I also think this is we know that like we've seen some of Dean's drawings in the journal and stuff, and I like wonder if this is also when he teaches himself to draw. And I just like I mean, we know that this era for Dean is like characterized by a lot of abandonment, because both he feels abandoned by Sam, even though Sam was doing what he had to do, and he's very abandoned by John, who is just,
even though he weirdly doesn't feel that abandoned by John.
Yeah, he doesn't clue into that until halfway through the first season, but but like, I think that what I like to see in that is that he actually goes and does some of the things, like some of his personal exploration stuff happens in this era between, the ages of 22 and 26.
Even though like Lisa obviously like didn't have the same emotional connection at the time that Cassie did, like he obviously felt some sort of emotional connection to her as well, like to like remember her like so clearly among the like literally like hundreds of women that Dean Winchester has allegedly been.
Yeah, which I actually tend to believe is like a lot less, and that he's
I think so too.
Exaggerating. But that's what I think. But that actually plays into that theory that like he doesn't actually sleep around as much as he implies that he does, and so when he does,
I've talked so many times, like especially like basically like from where our episodes are out now, basically to the end of the first season.
It's just
I've talked so many times about Dean's performative sexuality.
Yeah, his performative masculinity, his performative sexuality, and I wonder if like the fact that he actually makes stronger emotional connections than he likes to pretend he does, or he likes to imply that he does. And so I think maybe in terms of his time with Lisa, it's one weekend, he plays it off like not a big deal, but it obviously 9 years later, he is in the same town. He remembers her. He remembers, like, he looks her up.
He like explicitly like remembers the time that they had together.
and isn't like, he's fazed by the fact that she has a kid, and he's really fazed by the fact that it could be his kid, but he's not like as fazed as he should be, honestly, given his like life circumstances. He should be a lot more freaked out at the fact that he's way too excited about it.
That Ben is Dean's child.
100%. That's
I think the writers were cowards for not going that route.
I think they were. I don't think it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't like ultimately matter. But I also think that they were cowards for not doing it, for not playing that one through.
I think it wouldn't have mattered if season 3 was the only time that we saw Ben. I think going back and having Dean spend a year with Lisa and Ben, and then being like, no, he was never Dean's kid. Like, that's just like, they introduced a plot element that they decided that they didn't like, and it was too late.
Yeah, and I think honestly, it also undercuts what ultimately happens to Lisa and Ben, because they have this cop out of like, he's not Ben's real dad, but he was. I think we all we're all pretty solidly on that board. And I like love that also potentially started during the Stanford era. Like, that's when he was, or right before, like that's when he has this initial encounter with Lisa.
I wish the show had been brave enough to be like, Dean was bi. We could have got like actual like content about Lee.
Right, we could have like met Lee for more than an episode and not had him die at the end.
It's so weird that we don't have a Stanford era flashback either.
After all of those years, the fact that we don't, like, we only ever get really brief.
And like, they're not afraid to retcon stuff. Like, the whole entire like Mary Jeeman deal stuff is all retconned. John being abandoned by his father. So like, the fact that there isn't like an episode where like a case happens at Stanford, something happens that like makes them like not remember.
Well,
or,
exactly.
Like, that makes them not talk to each other anymore. I could see that too.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things they could have done.
I could see a case hitting too close to home, like at Stanford, and
Sam being like, I'm done, I cannot be part of this anymore.
Dean thinking, oh, like, this is it, Sam's back, and Sam being like, I am not back.
Sam being like, I will not let you drag me back into this.
Please leave California.
And then that being the straw that means they don't talk.
But like, the fact that we don't have an episode like that of 300 episodes is absolutely wild.
Tragic. But it does mean that we got to have this entire episode talking about all the things that happened during the Stanford era, which is quite a lot of things. Is there anything else specifically?
I don't think so. I feel like we got like the really big ones out.
I feel like we did. Oh, also the last thing that I was thinking about was how this is also the era when the Impala officially becomes Dean's. I don't know. Do you have an idea of like, do you have a headcanon for like how that happens?
Yeah, because like John, quote, gives the Impala to Dean for his 18th birthday, but he doesn't get the Impala.
No.
I feel like I can't imagine John like buying the truck. Like, John just like has the truck and it's very clearly John's. I have no idea like what that transition period is like.
Yeah, I always wondered if it was just like a thing where there's a hunt that John is going to go on and he's not taking Dean, or there's two hunts and and John just is like, well, we're both going to go separate ways. And instead of like making Dean hotwire a car, he hotwires the truck and then just like throws the keys of the Impala to Dean and goes like, and that's just, and then they just never talk about it again.
Yeah.
It's just from that point onwards, John just has the truck.
It just feels like there was like, either there was like a zero transition period, either like Dean woke up one day and the Impala was like fully his vehicle, or like I can't imagine John being like, I guess I'm gonna buy a truck. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, also like at some point they would have had to like transfer the like paperwork to Dean.
Yeah.
And like at what point did that happen? Or did they just like, or did Dean just like forge his dad's signature after John died and be like, it's mine? Or like at some point in there, like, yeah, it's a little unclear.
Because like I don't know, like the Impala has like such an emotional bond for John as well. Like it's not like
him giving it up is never,
it feels weird.
Well, and even in season 1 and like before John dies, there's still all of this thing where like it's, it's Dean's, but John also has a weird possessiveness about it whenever they're together. We're gonna link a few specific posts that we found, some of which we talked about, some of which we didn't talk about. There's a great like photo set of I mean it's just a photo set of Jensen, but it like looks like a young Dean photo set.
There's one with him smoking, and like I feel like, I don't know if we've talked about on this podcast or on my other podcast, but I fully believe that Dean has tattoos and he smokes.
Oh, I mean Dean was supposed to have tattoos, and the only reason they didn't was because of the budget. He was supposed to, so that also being something that happened during the Stanford era is that's when he gets a whole bunch of tattoos.
Yeah, I feel like it would have started like pre-Stanford era, and then over the Stanford era, like I feel like he would have got a lot more.
Yeah, just because he's bored, he doesn't have anyone. Like
if he is going through this like self-exploration, like
sexuality exploration, him like going and like getting a bunch of tattoos in like really places where they aren't seen a whole lot, but like are really meaningful to him.
Totally.
I love this. This is so much fun. This is like so many really good things.
Hello, this is Editing Abigail here. We had a few listener headcanons come in after KJ and I recorded this episode, and we also had some great Stanford era fan fictions that we came across while we were editing, and I wanted to take a few minutes to share those with you at the end of this episode. So, to start, I got a really fantastic post from a Tumblr user, Shmuz. I will link to their Tumblr in the episode description, but they had some really fantastic Stanford Era Headcanons. I'm just going to read some quotes from the post that they made. They wrote, I'd also definitely be interested in any extrapolation on Dean's relationship with Cassie. Her finishing up in school while they were together indicated that he possibly was in a collegiate environment during their relationship, one he wouldn't be accustomed to as he wasn't a college student himself, even though he was around the same age as all these other students. The potential for awkward conversations, people assuming he's a film major because of the trivia he knew, or another major entirely. The possible intersectional experiences Dean would have as an impoverished person who didn't have access to higher education, and Cassie being a woman of color. I really love this particular interpretation of this relationship between Dean and Cassie, because within Route 666, the episode where we meet Cassie, we don't really get a lot of backstory as to when they, like, what their relationship was like, or what Dean's experiences really were, other than that it was while Cassie was in college. And so I love kind of exploring that. I have one more quote from this post to read. They talked about Dean indulging in additional hobbies because of the alone time, because of John and him hunting separately more often, because of Sam not being there. They wrote, I think a lot of cheap paperbacks were bought and read during this time as he whiled away hours waiting for a suspect to appear or for laundry to finish. And this also reminds me of a couple of photos that a Twitter user had posted and tagged with Stanford Era Dean. They're young photos of young Jensen Ackles, obviously. And they're also going to be linked. That's from Twitter user Yeehaw Dean 67. They had a few really fantastic headcanons for the Stanford Era as well. I'm going to link to Yeehaw Dean's Twitter, and you can probably scroll back, and they talk a lot about Stanford Era Sam and Dean. They've also written a couple of fics set in that era, and we're also going to link those. They wrote one that just got released really recently, and it's lovely. It's really sad, but it's a lovely exploration of what Dean's first birthday after Sam left might have been like. When KJ and I were having our discussion, we also pulled from a few other Tumblr and Twitter users who had really great Stanford Era Headcanons. Every one of those that we use specifically is going to be linked in this episode description. And now on to some fan fiction recommendations. So there are a number of Stanford Era fanfic that I'm going to recommend here. Some of them are canon compliant, some of them are canon divergent, a couple of them are straight on AUs. But they're all set kind of in that era with young Sam and Dean. They range in ratings, so look at the tags before you read. So first we have Pity Party by Yeehaw Dean 67. This is a fic about how Dean spent his first birthday alone after Sam went to Stanford. Next we have Heard From Your Mother, She Don't Recognize You by Shmuz. And this one is a time travel fix-it. It's pre-canon, but also sort of post-canon, and it's a story where Cass wakes up in 2003 and meets Dean. Cass doesn't know who he is, but he becomes a hunter, and the story kind of unfolds from there. Next, we have Crossroads Liar by Dean's Milkshakes. This is also canon divergent, and is a fic where Dean, during the Stanford Era, tells Sam that he went to prison and that that's where he's been for 2 years, but there is more to the story than that. This is also a story that is set in the Stanford area, but involves Castiel, and lots of Jess in this fic as well, which is really, really awesome. And lastly, a fic called Forever Winter by Priceless Trash Panda, and this is a Cassie Dean fic, like exploring what their relationship was like a bit more. Bobby Singer is also in it, titled after a Taylor Swift song. If that's your thing, this fic is great. And it's hard to find Dean Cassie fics, so this is, great for that. That is going to be our fanfiction recommendations for Stanford Era. I know there are more fics out there that are set in this era. If you know of them and you want to share them, tag us on Twitter at DPTP Show. Or on TikTok at DriverPicksThePod, or send us a voicemail and talk about them, and we'll share it in a future episode. We would love to hear other headcanons you have for the Stanford Era, or other fanfic or fan-created content that is set in this era. It's a really fascinating piece of mostly blank canon area, so it makes it really fun. So come talk to us about any of the headcanons we've shared today, or about any that you would add to our list.
I think that's all we have today.
Yeah.
This
was so fun.
Thank you. Anytime you want to like headcanon about an era of Supernatural we don't know anything about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I would love to do that on our show. So
there we go. We'll do it. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, folks, that concludes this episode for today. You can subscribe to Driver Picks the podcast wherever you get your shows, and come back next week where we will continue our season 2 journey.
That's so exciting.
A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our Season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.